Hey guys, in this video I'm going to show you how to get set up with your Azure account. So what we're going to do is we're going to add users and add our employees in here, and we're then going to grant them access to Azure resources based on levels of privilege or based on their roles. The two concepts we're going to have a look at here are the Azure Active Directory role-based access control, and then we also have the Azure role-based access control. So looking at the Azure Active Directory role-based access control, this is where we're saying, okay, which users can add users into our tenant, which users can control which users have access to certain applications. So these might be third-party applications such as Slack, Salesforce, or Adobe. And then similarly or separately, when we're looking at the Azure role-based access controls, this is saying things like, okay, who can create a virtual machine, who can create subscriptions and essentially add to your Azure costs. But to be able to do the Azure role-based access control, we need to have people added into our Azure Active Directory role-based access control. A couple of terminologies there. There's links to the relevant documentation in the description here. Also, if you're looking to manage access to M365 licenses, the documentation is a bit confusing about this, but I will point out that you will need to go through to your M365 admin center to do this, not through the Azure Active Directory. Okay, so to get started, let's go ahead with getting set up in our tenants. So I already have a tenant active. You will have to go through a process of adding a tenant. Now I've used Contoso as an example here. This is one you'll see in documentation. But my tenant is set up, and you can see that the domain here is this one that I've created, this Contoso marketing with a bunch of numbers here. And then we've got the .onmicrosoft.com. You will get this where you haven't set up your domain. So it essentially acts as an alias. So some of the email addresses we will create will have a .onmicrosoft.com domain. This can be handy where you want to use the login as an alias, where you may not be using M365 for your emails. So if you're using G Suite, you do not have to go ahead and create a Microsoft email account. All right, so we're going to add a user. So click add, then user, and we're going to create them here. Now you will see that there's an option to invite user. This is, as you can see, a guest user. So you have internal collaboration and you also have external collaboration. External collaboration is where you would use invite user, and this might be a scenario where you are working with a managed service provider or a partner, or someone external to your organization managing your Azure services. But if you've got an internal team, then you want to use create user. So let's just create someone. His name's going to be Chris, and his email is going to be added to this at Contoso Marketing 1995-2021 domain .onmicrosoft.com. You will have a different one if you set up your domain, but I'm not going to cover that in this video. So we'll just give him a name. Now you want to generate the password here, and then you can of course share that password with them and then prompt them to change their own password. And we can then go ahead and assign them some roles. So this is the concept of role-based access control. You have a bunch of roles you can assign, and they all relate to the administration of users and applications in your Azure Active Directory. They don't pertain to Azure resources. So you've got a few things here around, adding security attributes, billing. For the purpose of least privilege, I'm going to use directory reader. So you see, you can read basic directory information, but it cannot add users, cannot add applications. It's just, I just want him just want to get him set up in the tenant, but I don't want him to have any control or administrative privileges. So we'll click select. And that's pretty much it. We can go ahead and click create. So this person, Chris Green, has been created now. So if you wanted to give him access to M365, again, you will need to go through your M365 admin center to do this. But if you wanted to give him access to enterprise applications, for example, perhaps you're using Slack or something like that, you can come in here and you can do that. Let's just choose like DocuSign. And we can click create. All right, so we've created our first single sign-on application, which is DocuSign, which means that as long as our user has authenticated through the Azure Active Directory, they will be able to gain access to this. So I can then go ahead and assign them access to this. All right, so here's our Chris Green that we selected before. Click assign. All right, he's now got access to Adobe DocuSign. Okay, great. So now we're going to talk about how we can give this Chris Green guy access to some resources in my Azure subscription. So there's a couple of ways you can do this. And if you want to look at ways of least permission, if you assign access at the subscription level, which you can do so through here, IAM, he will be able to have access and create resources in the entire subscription. So if you've got someone, or you've got maybe just one Azure administrator who is looking after the entire Azure environment, it would make sense to do so. The other side of it is if you only want him to have access to a certain resource group and resources within that resource group, it may make sense to create one. So we'll create a resource group, virtual machine resource group. Okay, this has been created, so we'll go to this resource. Okay, now I'm going to give him access to this particular resource. So I'm going to go here, and so first we're going to select the role. So you've got a few here. So owner, which means he'll be able to change everything. Contributor means he'll be able to access all the resources in here, but he cannot grant anyone else more resources or more access to these resources. And here he can't make any changes. There's a bunch of more granular ones that you can go through here, where it might be specific to a service. But for the purpose of this, I'm just going to keep it really simple. I don't want him to be able to add people in, so I'm just going to give him the role of contributor. I highlight that, I select next, and then I select who I want this to pertain to, Chris Green. I then click review and assign, and he's now being added. So I can see the in the role he's been assigned contributor, and the scope applies to this resource group. So that's pretty much it, guys. So he can go ahead now and he can go and add resources to this resource group. You will want to review these roles to make sure that they apply to the scenario that you're trying to achieve. If you want to add multiple users to the same role, you can go in here and you can create a group. So you can see here, I've already got one. I got a developer group here, but let's say I want to add another one, and I want to call it a virtual machine administrator, and I want to add members. Okay, there's my virtual machine administrator group. So what I'll do is I'll go create another user, and I'm going to add it to that virtual machine administrator. And let's say this guy's name is Brad Green. Again, we will generate the password, and then we will share it with him and then prompt him to change his password. And then we go back to groups, my virtual machine administrator group, members. There's Brad. Select. Cool, we can now see Brad and Chris here. So if I go back to my resource group and I say, okay, well, I want Brad and Chris to have access to this. Go to my IAM. I will take Chris out. I'll add contributor again. And I can then select the virtual machine administrator group. That's selected. Review and assign. Review and create. And great, I can now see that in the role assignments, Brad and Chris will now have access to this as part of the virtual machine administrator group. You can see them here. Okay, great. So they can go ahead and they can go and get started with managing resources in this resource group. The other thing is if you want to change billing, the default is credit card, but if you want to change the credit card that you got set up with, I won't be able to show it to you here because I am in a demo account. But if you jump into cost management, you then go to payment methods. And then you click add. You should be able to then go and change your payment methods. Because I'm in a demo account, I'm not able to do this. All right, guys. So yeah, that's everything you need to get set up in an Azure account. Please let me know in the comments if I've missed anything. Happy to follow this up in another video. Thanks, guys.